Hello and welcome to this week's episode of Conversations on Conversations, where each week we explore a topic to help us have more powerful conversations with ourselves and others. I'm your host, Sarah Noll Wilson, and joining me back into the studio today is my dear friend, Stephanie Chin. You may remember that we had a lovely conversation at the end of 2022, and we're excited to have her back. So a little bit about Steph. Stephanie Chin has spent the past 2 decades as a nonprofit leader, including working for the United Way Network, both globally and locally, and at SRI International Incorporated. She believes that we all do better when we all do better. And her life's mission is to help everyone operate near their potential while expanding it by their own definition. She's led the day-to-day operations at MyFreeTaxes at United Way worldwide, expanding the number of free tax filers from 50,000 to over 200,000 in 2 years. And she led the inclusive approach to project management at SRI International, leading a cross-division project management leadership team on the implementation of a new financial planning system. She approaches poverty fighting with a race-conscious lens and advocates for equitable practices and systems changes, and contributed to the United Way worldwide equity framework. Chin's new venture, Spicy Conversations, will help clients improve inclusive leadership practices and focus on behavior and system change that make a difference. She has a Bachelor of Arts from University of California, Berkeley, a JD MBA from Emory University, has a green belt in Lean Six Sigma and coaching training from the Coactive Training Institute. In addition to all of that brilliance, some of you may know because you hear me talk about stuff in the work we do. She has been my leadership coach for the last year and a half, formally, but informally for 6 or 7 years prior to that. So welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you. Good to be back.
I'm excited to have you back. Steph, what else do you want people to know about you as they're listening to this, perhaps for the first time hearing you or for the second time?
So what came to me to bring up today was I am often in DC. I do work there and have a lot of good friends there. And I was walking through the National Portrait Gallery, which is one of my favorite free museums. Gotta love the Smithsonian. And was talking with someone about, would you want to be on the walls? And what would you want to be remembered for? And I said, all I want to be remembered for is being a person that when I'm with someone else, they feel like they can get to be who they really are with me, and they get to be a good version of that, whatever that means to them. And that's going to play into the conversation we have today.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to think about what you want to be remembered for.
The word that comes up is that she did her best to make people feel a little bit better about wherever they were at and didn't cause, as much harm. Mm-hmm. I feel like that's the word that comes up for me a lot, is just like, how do we just keep reducing the harm we're causing? Mm-hmm. Something fun that I would love, this isn't necessarily where our conversation is going to go, but one of the things that has been really fun watching your journey is this sort of life experiment that you've been running.
Yeah.
And I wonder if you just take a moment to share it, because I would love for people to be exposed to a different possibility than maybe what they consider.
So I live my life more like an experiment than anybody else I know, which is let's try something on and see how it goes, and then take that into consideration. And so I've spent a lot of my life moving to new places to see what they're like, what my life is like within them, and also resetting and exploring what a different version of myself can be. And so when I decided to transition from nonprofit organizational leadership to be a coach and to run my own business, be a solopreneur, be an entrepreneur, I was like, well, that's one experiment. How do I like it? Let's try it on. Both of my parents, my grandparents were business owners, but they were Chinese restaurants and Chinese laundries, which was like their positional classic immigrant story. And then my parents both owned their own businesses. My father's a lawyer. My mother's a realtor. They are all independent. And all of their children went into work for bigger companies. And so as
Wait, do you think that was influenced by, just wanting
100%.
to, yeah.
My mother is one of the hardest working people I know. She works 100-hour weeks. My father would wake up before anyone else was awake so that he could leave, do his work, and be back in time to make us dinner because he valued the time that we had together at dinner time. And so they had no one to pass things off to. There were no breaks. There was working on vacations. There was no stop ever. And it was all on them 100%. And the rest of us all went into teams. And so when I think about the experiment that I'm on now, I think this is an affirmation that the team environment is what I love the most, and that's I love to work with teams. But I think, and I think you think, and we've been talking about this a lot, Sarah, we all do our work better together, but there were reasons why my parents felt like they didn't have the support to do it with others.
Sure. Yeah.
And so the entrepreneurship journey has definitely been like, how does this fit? Do I prefer it over working with an organization? There's a lot of people questioning that right now due to the level of honestly harm they're feeling in the organizations that they're at, the way that they're feeling that the workplace is not contributing to their greater aspirations for life. And what does that look like to try on something else? And then from a geographic perspective, I spent 2 years during the pandemic not going home for Christmas. Cleveland, Ohio is the home. I was living in San Francisco. And I was like, what would my life look like if it was set up so that I could have the best life and the best relationships that I wanted? And so 2023 was a year of experimenting, of splitting my life in the 4 communities where I'd spent the most time and had the most people. That's San Francisco, DC, Des Moines, and Cleveland. And so what I learned from that was also who cares most about me being present? Turns out the nibblings, the niece and nephews, the young ones, because adults, we can operate so many of our relationships virtually, and that is very different in person. And that's for me as a person, not a general prescription for everyone else. And then this year has been more about what does centering in one space and then doing more trips where you have deeper engagement with folks. But again, kind of like the question around remote work and working, when you have intentional times for connection and intentional times for deep work, and how do you set both of those things up for success? That's a little bit of the experiment, but everything is like, let me try things on. How does that feel?
That's what that's something that I admire so much. And it's been fun to watch your journey, because it would be real easy, for somebody who maybe thought to themselves, oh, well, I'd like to be closer to my family, but what if, or I would like to, have the opportunity to spend more time here. And if you have the, privilege, if you have the resources and the flexibility, what does it look like to go, well, let me try it. Let me do it differently. And you and I have had a lot of conversations too about just, there's so many norms in what it means to be an entrepreneur, what it means to, be productive, quote unquote, in American society. And like, how do you push against it to say, what's the life that's right for me? It's, I'm not surprised that, the group that wants you to be most present, and also what an incredible impact and legacy too, right? Like those are, we know as they grow, like it's a very fleeting amount of time that you can be in their life in this way.
Something I talk about with a lot of parents is there was a Reddit post a couple months ago, I want to say, but maybe it was close to a year at this point, that indicated the only ones who will remember when you worked late 20 years from now are your children. And I talk about that with a lot of working parents in particular. And I think I was one of those children where my mother was absolutely focused on helping our family be financially stable. And I think we as siblings said, we are in a different position. We don't have to make those trade-offs the same way she did.
Yeah. So let's talk about this idea of, not just limited to the workplace, but creating the environment and space, for people to be able to show up and be their best selves, to feel safe to be themselves. Something that we hear a lot from clients is we're trying to diversify. We want to diversify. We know we want to diversify, but we just can't keep people.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm just gonna leave. I'm just gonna open it up to there.
So, okay, a workplace wants to welcome people who are different. That means that probably the way which we have been doing things are not going to work. And we were actually just talking about this right before the call. I have a client that I'm doing a sales call with where they know that they are going to grow and basically double in size. They know that therefore their operational approach is not going to work, but they don't know what one will. That's the same thing as if you change who you're bringing into your doors, how you're bringing them into your doors, how you're working together, whether or not you're working in one place or in multiple places together. So if we think about the challenge for organizations, say, we know it's a good thing, we know that's a value that we have, that it'll bring good things to the company. How do we reorient how we do our operations is a very different question than how do we just diversify our workforce? And are more likely to bring folks in and then say, this is the way we do things. How are you going to do it like we do it?
Yeah.
Right? Not because there's malice or anything like that. It's like, oh, this is the way we do things here. So onboarding anyone, this is the way we do it. And I think I just listened to your conversation with my favorite recruiter, Ify Walker. And for me, what stood out was 50%, and maybe this number is not quite right, she can correct me, of new executive hires are seen as not successful 18 months later. It is not their skill set. They got there because of their skill set, because they know how to do the job. It's because the environment was configured a certain way. And they have to figure out how to operate in it as a leader with power and ways of doing things from their own places.
Yeah, yeah.
And so really the challenge for organizations is how do we grow and adapt and change how we do things in a work environment that is changing from what it used to be. Mm-hmm. And all of that stuff is really, really hard. Anybody who's rolled out a new technology can tell you adoption rates are always worse than you think. It's never as helpful, or very rarely as helpful as you thought it was going to be. And that's just the technology, not even how do we work together? How do we think about all those things while we're also trying to drive a business and deliver things to our customers, our clients.
Yeah.
And so it is a much bigger question than I think a lot of people think it is when they say, I want to bring more people who look differently from me in the doors.
And I mean, I appreciate, I really love that word of reorient, of and recognizing that what works for the group now is going to be different than the group that's coming in, right? Whether that is, I mean, I think about, what was the latest stat I read, that by 2026, 25% of the workforce will be Gen Z, or 2030 or something. It's pretty substantial, right? It's one of those.
Right.
And part of it is that it's adapting and changing. It's not linear. It's not this linear process. And I think that that's sometimes what I see people wanting, right? Like, tell me what to do.
Yeah.
Instead of it looking at it through the lens of, what might we try? Right? How do we learn from what other companies are doing? One of the things that I always like to explore are what are some of those common traps we fall into, whether it's organizationally as a leader, and then, and we can talk about some of the things you and I've talked about as like my company is growing and what does that look like? But And part of it is, gosh, there's this week, I think we've had 3 different calls with different organizations that are realizing like, we're behind. Like we have a real problem, and we have people in power who maybe don't believe it's a problem. Right. So that's a whole nother realm. How do we do this? So what are some of what are some of the traps? So one you named was you need to be a culture fit for us. Yeah. It's a smaller thing. And it's like, we're looking for culture fit. Like you need to adapt to who we are and what we do. Yeah.
There are so many, and none of them are easy. And also, we haven't gone through a thorough testing process of are those really the things? Or have we tried something else where that isn't the case, right? We don't have another scenario where these things don't exist, but I have some suspicions. So when I first got asked the question of like, what's getting in our way at an organization, where I really thought, you know what I think the number one challenge is for a leader is that almost everyone who has become a leader, the system has worked to get them there. Yeah. And therefore, they see more of the system's successes than their failures. And so due to no negative aspect of anything, when the system operates as you think it should or could, or it has worked well enough for you, you don't see how it doesn't work for others. So the bias that is called survivorship bias. It's the way your brain works. Yeah. The example that you remember where it worked out, that's the one you remember. So when I was able to get from here to there in 15 minutes, even if it's the fastest time, it's suddenly the time, right? When very famous people who are very successful write books and say this is the way to do things, it's usually because it worked for them, not because all the people who use that approach, it worked for. Yeah. And so I think one of the big challenges is, how do you address a system where there are some people at the bottom or not at the top or feel like they cannot get to the top saying, I feel like if this thing were different, I would have had a better chance at giving you everything you wanted so that I could get up there too and contribute like you are doing. Not to say better necessarily, but like, I think I could have done it too. But this thing kept getting in my way, but it didn't get in your way. How do you understand that as a leader when you are essentially told, well, I had to climb the rock, or I had to climb the wall the same way you did. And it shows that I am, that system is supposed to say you're better if you're able to accomplish these things, even despite the challenging environment. And so I think one of the biggest challenges is it is almost impossible to objectively assess when we think we're being objective based off of the data that we are able to collect. Yeah. And that's one of those challenges that's like one of those big, hairy ones that people are like, well, how am I going to fix that? And the way I always say it is, every time I enter an organization and I start talking to the staff, there's things that they get tripped up on all the time that other people don't have to deal with. So you hear those stories of the CEOs who normally don't have to submit a reimbursement, but they'll go through it once a year just to see how frustrating the experience is. Because there's a lot of people, if they take a trip for work and it's a reimbursement process, that affects their cash flow for their regular expenses in a way that it doesn't for the CEO. Also, the CEO's assistant is the one who deals with it. They're the expert, and often things are expedited for them. So they don't even have to worry about it. Often the company's just paying for it straight out because they have a credit card. There is no reimbursement process the company pays from the beginning. So it could be those sorts of small things, but what it requires then is a better detection system so that people, when they flag things, or when things seem to be operationally not as strong as they could be, and that requires a lot of people listening to, here's what the issues are, elevating them up, and then people having the power and ability and time to make those things better, which I think a lot of people are doing all the time, but often in a way that feels more like a Band-Aid because the bigger issue at play requires a lot more work, a lot more effort.
Yeah. It's one of the things that's coming up as I hear you talk about this. I was just mentioning this to a client. I was listening to an article on NPR or an interview, and the author who had he had written this book on this hate crime that had happened in Chicago. And one of the things he said was, there's always your individual truth, and then there's the systemic truth, right? Like, meaning there's the data. And I don't know that I've heard it said in this way, or there was something about this moment that was like, oh shit, like it clicked. And, and it was your individual truth will almost always trump like the systemic truth of what's around you. And one of the ways you overcome that is you have to start being open to and combining multiple truths. And I appreciate you calling that out, because we see that all the time. But that language of I wrote it down because I don't think that's come out of our conversations, but I think it's really, really powerful and provocative. Is like, they see more of the system's success and failures. And so how does this show up? It shows up in things like, often the executives score the culture very differently than other people. It shows up like they don't understand why, I worked for a leader who would get really frustrated. Like, why isn't everyone contributing 100% of their 401k? Like, this is it's free money we're giving them. Like, because they're literally like figuring out, do I pay for food or my childcare? And they're a single parent, and I'm like, their environment is very different, than his comfort.
Also, on 401ks, the whole default opt-in, opt-out process plays a big role. If you've got a lot of other decisions going, even if you can afford it, you check the basic thing, right? Or the thing that doesn't require a check mark. So there's a good amount of research about 401ks that once they moved from opt-in, do we want to do this, to opt-out, so many more people use it. Just because we have so many decisions to make, it's just easier not to make a decision in so many different scenarios. Yeah. So yes, their realities are different, but also the system overall, people don't make decisions they don't have to make. And if you want them to make the best decision, you default it by giving them the option to opt out. They can get the free money. Why are you making them request it? Yeah.
No, that's a great addition. Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, and then like, how do you stay connected, and how do you understand those barriers or those rubs or the hills people have to climb, and then let's apply that not just to the like formal power structure, but that's also true when you hold multiple dominant identities in an organization, right? Or not even in an organization, just like in your world, in your community. If you don't see, you just don't see because you didn't experience the same kind of challenges.
Yeah. Well, and I often cite the research that like the empathy part of your brain works less well the more successful you are.
Yeah.
It gets less exercise, right? It's not being tasked as often. So it's not, I don't like to blame anyone for like, oh, you're successful, so you can't be. That's not true. But like without attention.
Yeah.
The world formulates you into, and also what a lot of executives are asked to do is sort what's important versus what is not. Yeah. And what is determined to be important is historically driven. And historically, feelings should not belong in the workplace in an American work environment. And therefore, it is not important, but it is affecting so many things in how your organization operates. That I think using all of the older definitions of here's what's important and what is not is putting a lot of our current leaders in a very precarious position where they're now, it's being demanded of them to have a greater skill level at working with others than what got them to that position, which has historically been individual contribution.
Yeah. And leading by command and control. I mean, there is this very real tension, and that language of demanding is very present. Whether it's the workforce, whether it's clients who are saying, hey, like, y'all need to figure this out because we don't want to do work with a company like this. And, and then what I observe happen, right, is in some cases, some people lean into that. Some people get curious. Some people explore and go, okay, well, how do I do it differently, even though it's hard? I mean, I can't tell you how many people in leadership who I would identify as like white male go, I don't know that I'm the right leader now because I don't know how to do this. And
said in a different way, and I think I'm going to share this with you. I've come from the nonprofit sector, and there's a recent report out about leaders of color, particularly in nonprofits, but actually all leaders of nonprofits, and how there are fewer people of color who are aspiring to leadership positions because the weight of everything that is expected of them is growing. And so it feels even less like you're able to be successful. And I've talked to quite a few executives who are leaving their organizations because they are like, I just want to focus on doing the work. There are so many other things that's making it harder to do it, right? And so I think there's a lot of people right now who are questioning, is the role of the leader worth what you have to pay to do it well?
Yeah. We just had a session this morning, and we, our internal client was talking about how, we're trying to ask these leaders to coach and develop people and to have these conversations about their career and all of that. And he's like, and they don't know. And I was like, no, because most people in management are accidental managers, right? We expect them to understand psychology and human behavior and all of this, when exactly, like, most people are promoted because of their technical skills. And then, and then we get frustrated because they don't know how to do it. I was like, well, of course they don't know how to do it. Like, this isn't something that, you and I weren't born knowing how to lead and guide conversations like this. We practiced and we learned and we studied and we, right. And then to your point about prioritization, it's always one of the things that is the lowest of this fire is in front of us right now that is going to impact our bottom line. So this is what's going to get the attention, even though this is actually the kindling that's going to increase that fire.
I'll also say, like, being a manager and a people leader is really, really hard because the best people managers from my perspective are the ones who can help someone do their best work even when they're very different from them. Yeah. So, like, I'm a strong J in Myers-Briggs. It's not even necessary that it's like Myers-Briggs, not my favorite, but it's a good language for lots of people to know about. So I like things to be defined, to have targets, to move things forward. It is very frustrating for me when someone wants to push back deadlines and we don't know what's going on because I have to move a lot of other things around it. But my job as a people leader is to not force my way on them, but to find a way for them to do their best work when I have to be mindful of the schedule, but they maybe don't, but enough so that the next person who has to take the thing that they're working on to the next stage is ready for it. And that is not fun for almost anyone to think about. How do I set you up for success when I don't need any of the supports that I'm going to give you? Yeah. I just do it by naturally, quote unquote, right? Like, it is my ingrained skill. This is the way that I do things. And more often, it's much easier to be like, do it my way because I know how to help you do it well. Not even because I need you to do it, but that's the only way I know how to help you do it well. And that's what a lot of managers are doing is, this is the way I know how to advise you because it works for me. Almost none I talk to can say, based off of how I've assessed what works well for you, this might work. Try it on.
Yeah.
That's much more complicated.
Yeah. And, and then multiply that if you have a team of 20 and, and then working with other teams and people. And, I feel like the word that I hear over and over at all the different leadership and HR conferences I've been attending is we're in the age of individualization when it comes to work, whether that is, how do we pay closer attention to, well, what do you actually need to be successful? What's important to you? And that takes a lot of time and effort. That's
interesting that's your, what you're hearing. I'm curious how you'll respond to my reaction to that, which is we're in the age of finally realizing that cookie cutter doesn't work.
Yeah, so
we're not in individualization, though it might feel that way.
Yeah.
But we are, I think, now in the stage of saying we have been approaching things almost like we're going to deal with everyone, like push them into the cookie cutter. They're the cookie that will get molded into it, and then we're going to shoot a lot out. Mm-hmm. And yes, we might put different icing on it or whatever sort of thing, but like we are in the stage of realizing that one way is no longer working for us, which then is making people feel like so much individualization. I'm doing something different for everyone. But there's lots of very consistent themes, which is I think what can be almost universal is take the time to listen. I really like radical candor's framing generally, but what I found in nonprofit spaces in particular is the better terms for me than challenge directly with care is be clear and caring. Because I think what Kim Scott and her team are really trying to do is be clear with people. If they are not meeting expectations, they need to know that. If they are meeting expectations, people need to know that. But I think we're in a grown-up game of telephone. What you think you said might not be what they heard. And it requires a lot more back and forth. And so what's almost universal is you can say what you're going to say, but follow up, check in. Is that the way you heard it? Okay, are we on the same page about what success looks like? This is what we're going to do together. And I'm going to hold you accountable to the things that you have control over, that you are responsible for pushing forward, and not for the things of other people, right?
Yeah. It's the I love that. Yeah. Like, no, we're just realizing this isn't working anymore. Because let's be real. It worked for some people before, but there was such a cost to so many. It's like,
or it could be small, medium, large sizes versus 2, 4, 6, right? Like, we're getting more individualized than we have been.
Yeah.
And I think people are feeling like it's much more individualized
than it actually is or needs to be. Well, and that, and that's something you and I, we've talked a lot about, and now because of our work together I feel like it's something that we talk about a lot in the team or even with clients, is just that idea of being explicit. How do we be much clearer? Because even the language of challenging directly can feel aggressive to some people, depending on how they were raised or their culture. But that idea of how do we be more explicit and, and to echo that point of, and check for understanding, because just because you think it made sense to you doesn't necessarily mean it's going to, like, other people will interpret it in the same way.
Before you move on, I just want to say explicit is an American biased term.
Is it?
Here's the reason why.
Yeah, no, give it to me.
Clear. Yeah. Americans, right? So you and I have talked about this often. I will reference the culture map and how they talk about high context versus low context. Low context is be explicit. That's American culture generally. Japan is implicit, but it is clear within the folks who understand it. So what do you need to be clear on? If people are clear on things, do you need to be explicit? Or is it because people are not clear because they don't have a shared understanding, right? It kind of
hurts my brain. It hurts my brain a bit. But here's how
with your head.
Here's how I'm seeing it. Is like a frog hopper.
Yeah.
like this is what allows us to get to that point, right? Well, and the other thing that I want to go back to that you said, just to amplify it, is listening and observing. And because I know a lot of people love the assessments, and it's pretty amazing that when you can take just a few moments to just really pay attention to somebody, you get a pretty good sense of what's important to them. And even if you're not accurate, right? To be like, here's what I observe and here's my sense, or even asking them, hey, here's, like, what do you need in this situation? I feel like, sometimes, there's a fear or a worry or even just like a detachment of like what you're observing, your intuition. It might not, your interpretation might not be right. I've always loved that definition. Your intuition is right, but your interpretation may not be. Of like, if you sat down and went, what do I know to be true about my team members? What have I observed and how they work really well? I think about that for my lived experience. When I was in my last month of my job at RUG, when I got diagnosed with ADHD, came in to my boss and I was like, well, apparently I got a bad case. And she was like, wait, are you surprised? Like, I'm not.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, this isn't new to you. She's like, no, that's why I knew with you, right, that I needed to help you. I needed to help with prioritization. I knew with you that I needed to set external deadlines, and it was just like, oh shit. Okay. Yeah. Thanks for knowing me.
Yeah.
And, and to that point of what is possible, like, what do you, like, when you think about either what you've seen work or what you dream about, what do you feel like is possible that we haven't tapped into? Or, I'll just say that. What is possible when we're able to more consistently, intentionally adapt and adjust, right, to the people we're working with?
So I'm a dreamer and I'm an existentialist. And so I'm going to go really meta. And I hope some people come along with us on this journey. I don't really know how your listeners are going to enjoy this conversation. But so I'm a big nerd, went to a lot of school. When you think about how things operate in the world right now, what I hear a lot of is we always have more than enough ideas. We don't have the ability to execute against all of the good ideas. And so we're limited by our execution capacity. I think one of the things people are really excited about with AI and automation, everything like that, is what if it became easier to execute any potentially good idea and test it to see if it's good? So what if instead of being limited by our operational powers, we could do everything that we thought might be a good idea, and then we could live in the dreams of what is the best, like what's another new idea we could come up with that could level us up in our game, whatever our life is, both collectively as a world and individually as people. And so for me, what I see is so many people who feel like they are not seen as valuable and doing valued to pour into, that someone will be like, I want you to level up and in the ways that you want to be. And I see how great you are already. I think most people don't feel that way in the world. And so what if in our ability to execute, we were able to say, we want to really unleash the powers for you to be productive in whatever definition you have of it, and be your best self. So my dream goal is to help everyone operate near their potential. And in my head, that's a graph with a potential curve, while expanding that graph, moving it out by your definition, not mine, not me saying, I need you to do this thing, but whatever the more of, the better of that people want in their lives. How do we do more of that? And I think that's the dream that I'm driving towards, is what if more people felt self-actualized towards I can enter a place and really do my best work. I feel like almost no one feels that way.
Yeah.
And that's the big loss, is because almost everyone I talk to is like, I could do more if they gave me the opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. I always love the moments when I'm in these conversations, and then what transpires in my brain is like, what's the reflection questions? What are the questions that we can be asking? Even just that, that do people feel like they can enter your space and be their best selves and do their best work, or, open it up of like, what are the ways in which they can? What are the ways in which we're contributing to not, but also that, am I valuable enough to be poured into?
Yeah.
Well,
and like back to your first, like, or one of your first questions about like, what's getting in their way? What are the challenges of me talking about leaders? What happens when one leader or a bunch of the leaders who've gotten up there are like, this is exactly that place. And then there's even a minority of people, but consistent life experiences or demographics that are saying, not for us.
Yeah.
So it's not even that this organization's all bad or all good, but if it's good for some people, can it be good for more?
Yeah.
Or can it only be good for some and the rest of us should leave?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I like to dream that it's not the second, that it can be, and that people would love it to be. Oh, no, I don't need it to just be my way, but that's the way I've experienced things. This has worked well for me, and I've been trying to grow that. What does it look like to make it you too?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and recognizing that, this is something that, again, has come up in our work that I want to get out into the airwaves, so to speak, and recognizing that what I think the way that we've talked about it is, when your group has operated in a way that has felt really good for that group, has felt really psychologically safe for that group, there can be a loss when you have to adjust it. There can be a loss when the equilibrium, if you will, gets a little disrupted. And even just recognizing that that's just part of the journey of adapting and evolving. That's what I've been kind of keeping in mind as I think about our own growth or whatever, is like, who we are now isn't going to be who we are in a couple of years. There will be some things that will be great about that, and there might be some things to grieve about that, and all of that is okay. But recognizing that, what we need now for even just this literal group of humans is gonna look different when different humans come into play, or when there's different external factors that are influencing things and all of that. And so just almost being prepared, or not surprised that there's gonna be some rub points. And so how do we anticipate it? How do we, I think, and that's something that I've really appreciated about our work is, and you'll use the analogy of we're coming around the curve. How do we make sure we don't jump it? How do we start to understand where we might jump this curb here as we bring on people who are different, as we bring on, as we grow, as we expand, as we tackle other things?
Yeah. So I'm going to put this on the recording, but you can decide whether or not to include it in the podcast, right? I've been pretty explicit about your team's too nice for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Which generally is a good thing, right? And I think this was one of my challenges in Des Moines. Folks are really nice. And I come with a little more kick. That's why my company is called Spicy Conversations, right? And folks have been generally very lovely for me. But what that means is I have no psychological safety, because every single time I give you something, I need to decide how to make the meal for your taste. And know that if I make it too spicy and I kill you, right? In the food, right?
Burn.
You have a tummy issue, it doesn't work. Then I'm out.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And that's not because any of you are trying to do that to me. It's not because you're saying you cannot be spicy here. It is
Mm-hmm.
because as someone who is entering a group where everyone's getting along so well and they're
Mm-hmm.
so nice, do I want to blow this up by
Mm-hmm.
contributing? And what are the consequences for me, for them? And how productive is that even?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And
Yeah.
those are the questions that people who aren't as similar to the people in power in particular are constantly negotiating every time or very often
Yeah.
they are contributing, and they have something that other people aren't thinking of. And we know from research, sociological research, that if people are put in a room and there's two lines, one line's longer than the other, but you have all these people saying the shorter line is longer, a large percentage of our population will say that the shorter line is longer rather than to stand out in the crowd.
Mm.
Right? And so there's all these psychological and sociological elements that are saying, do I want to be that person who, one, sticks out as not part of the group,
Yeah.
who might mess it up, but also, is this one thing worth it to make things even better?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's yeah, I mean that I don't have any more to add to it, but just like in agreement. And I think like what I appreciate about how you approach this and why is like some of this is just human nature, and we have to just be aware of it, and aware that if you only, view the world through your lens, like you're going to miss out, and there might be things you do that you don't realize might cause harm, or you might minimize, or whatever the case is. And that's not excusing, right?
Well,
or like, but
we
it's
all create harm.
Yeah.
We don't realize.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's not some of us are doing it because we're not paying attention.
Yeah. It's and I think that that's just like such an important, it's an important invitation, I think, to normalize that, because right now, one of the things that I see a lot, and it's something I've had to push against too, as you know, intimately in our work, is like, I know there's a lot of, and again, let me just say it, there's a lot of white folks in power who, well, this just came up yesterday. They're like, they don't want to say the wrong thing, so they're just not going to say anything.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want to get a complaint made, so they're just not going to do anything. And I don't even know where I'm going with that necessarily, but like, how do we keep normalizing? Like, how do we engage in the conversations? How do we? I mean, one of the things that has been a gift in my work with you is like, yeah, you're going to mess up. It's like, it's not a question of if, it's when. And then what do you do with that? And how do you learn? And how do you repair? And how do you do differently? And how do we understand those dynamics so that we can show up differently and more effectively within them?
Yeah, I think it's a big outstanding question, because I don't know how many people feel like they have gone through that process successfully yet.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Of what does vulnerability in a leadership position look like? And I think we have lots of media, news, press release articles and related stories of someone said something stupid and lost their job.
Yeah.
And therefore, how are we creating the incentives for anyone? Do we want people to speak out, or do we not? Right?
Yeah.
Do we want people to take risks, or do we not? I kind of don't want people to take risks with junior staff who are going to pay for it.
Sure.
While trying to be on their own learning journey. That's one of the reasons why I took this approach of like, let me be the consultant. Let's talk about this in private.
Yeah.
Let's unpack some of these things. Let's have someone who has more similar power and experiences to you to be able to say, well, you've invited this conversation. Have you thought about it this way?
Mm-hmm.
Well, then how do you operationalize that in your business now that you have this expanded view of, I don't know if that works. Let me try something else. And maybe a way that I can do that is to say, I'm in my own learning journey. can I try something with you? And then to journey in with someone else, recognizing that, especially if you're a person of power, most people will say yes. Yeah. And most people will appreciate that you asked, even if they really don't want to be a part of it.
Yeah, sure.
But like, how do we help people do those things? And also, don't expect to come out and be like, I got it right and we're done.
Right. Yeah. As we wind down our time, this was a question that I had asked my good colleague and friend, T. Maxine Woods McMillan. And I haven't ever asked you it. So I'll give you a moment to think about it, but you probably have an answer at the ready. What are the questions that you want or wish people in positions of power and authority were asking more?
Oh, so the way I'm going to go this is going to be completely different. But am I where I want to be in life? Because I was actually just talking about this with an Asian American leader who was noting the trajectory of people who are like us, as I am Asian American, for those who are just listening on the podcast and might not know, of being in powerful positions and hating their lives.
Sure, yeah.
And I think part of the challenge right now is there's a whole bunch of leaders who are there because they were good at school, because they were told to do all of these things, but aren't living their best lives either. And so one question I would love leaders to ask is like, am I where I want to be? What do I want more of in my life? Is where I am right now and the things that I'm doing, is that what I want more of? Or do I want less of it? Even before they start thinking about their leadership position. But I think a lot of leaders right now are not asking themselves that questions, are not operating from a place of empowerment or joy themselves, and are therefore just following rules that have been passed on to them. Yeah. Like, this is what I'm supposed to do. This is the title that I have taken on. Therefore, it is my job to cut 1,000 jobs today. And so I'm just going to do it. Yeah. A lot of the people who I talk to who have had to do that go, I hated doing that. Right. But they were following the prescriptions that came before them because they weren't in a position of saying, can we do something better? Is this what I want to be doing right now? Like, what is the challenge? Is it really the thing that we have historically said it is? And I think many more times than we realize it's not. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's such a lovely invitation, because I can think of lots of leaders I've worked with who are like, I'm the CEO and I'm like the most unhappy I've ever been. Like this was supposed to solve everything. And then connect that to, if you don't feel good, if you don't feel at your best, like how the hell can you create a culture where other people can do the same, like can lean into their best selves?
Yeah. And I, very early in my career while I was in law school, I spoke to an owner of a law firm that was successful. And he was like, if someone had told me that I would now spend most of my day on HR issues, probably wouldn't have done this whole thing, right? And I think that's, I'm talking to an increasing number of leaders of organizations who are like, this isn't feeling like what I want to be doing. This is feeling like I did something that got me to here, that I was really excited about, and I'm less excited about this position now. Yeah. But it was the next step, and so I took it. Yeah. Or this is where the growth has gone, and shouldn't I keep it? Yeah. I think there's a lot of us who are wondering, especially post-pandemic, is this the meaning of life that I want?
Yeah. That feels like a beautiful place to wrap up. Stephanie, I adore you. I always learn. There is so much I love.
We talked about things I was not planning at all. I know, to talk about.
But you know what was really fascinating is also like that point you were making about AI and like the execution. Like you and I are going to have a different conversation about that. Like my brain is buzzing amongst other things. Okay. So, folks, we are going to wrap up this conversation because Steph and I will just keep chatting, and Nick already had to cut us off so we could start recording this. If I may, let me promote your work. So, for leaders of any organization, any size, right? I mean, yeah, I'm a coach and I work with leaders, and I believe even coaches need coaches. And it has been one of the most powerful and not always comfortable work that I've done. But without question, it has helped. My work with Stephanie, with you, has helped me be a better person, better leader. It has impacted. So if you are somebody who is looking to work with somebody who's going to challenge you, but also brings this incredible depth of understanding the evolution of businesses and team growth and inclusion and just all of the things, I cannot recommend Steph enough. So with that said, for people who are interested in connecting with you and learning how to work with you, what's the best way for people to do that?
Sure. The easiest place is on LinkedIn. That's now my major social media outlet. Stephanie Chin or Spicy Conversations, we're both on there. Also, I've not been inundated by requests from folks after our last podcast. So also this, if anybody just wants to have a deep conversation, I have a Calendly link that anyone can book like one free call just to chat about some of the things you're like mulling in your head, because there's not enough spaces like that, period. And I like to have interesting conversations.
And it's not, it's not lip service, folks. Like, I feel like anytime I'm like, I was thinking about this, you want to have a conversation about it? Why don't you throw something on my calendar? So so do it. Take advantage of it. You won't regret it. Steph, thank you. As always.
Thank you. Have a good rest of the day.
Yeah, you too. Our guest this week has been Stephanie Chin. And obviously I always get something out of our conversations. It's why I pay her to be in conversation and help me as a leader. But I have to say, there's so much that I'm going back to. And the one that I just want to reiterate is how everyone wants to be valued enough to be poured into. Like, am I valuable enough to be poured into? And the thing that I'm thinking about with that for myself is, who do I pour into and who do I not, and why? And am I okay with that? So I'd love to hear from you. As always, my friends, this is my invitation, and I want more people to take advantage of it because I love to hear from you. But what resonated for you? What came up for you? What questions came up for you? You can always send us an email at podcast@sarahnollwilson.com, where I read and respond to every single email we receive. So send those our way. And if you want to support the show, there's 2 ways you can do it. The first is to rate, review, and subscribe to the show on your preferred podcast platform. This allows us to get more exposure and to be able to continue have the conversations like we did with Stephanie. And if you haven't already, consider becoming a patron. You can go to patreon.com/conversationsonconversations, where your financial support will completely go to supporting the team that makes this show possible. Also, some pretty great benefits in addition to supporting the team is you'll get early access to episodes that are ad-free, and you'll get some very unique Conversations on Conversations swag. So check that out. Again, that's patreon.com/conversationsonconversations. And then speaking of the team, let's give them a big shout out to our producer, Nick Wilson, our sound editor, Drew Knoll, to our transcriptionist, Becky Reinert, our marketing consultant, Jessica Birch, and the rest of the Snowco crew. Thank you so much. And a final thank you to our guest, Stephanie Chin, and pushing all the ways we can think differently about work and making it better for all. Well, my friends, that brings us to the end of our episode. This has been another episode of Conversations on Conversations. And remember, when we can change the conversations we have with ourselves and others, we can change the world. Thank you so much for listening, for showing up for yourself and for us. Remember to rest, rehydrate, and we'll see you again soon.